Good morning. This is being recorded on December 10th. There's so much going on that it's hard to know where to start. I am going to talk about Syria and the issues surrounding it. But before I do so, I thought I would hopscotch around the world and give you a sense for the context of which this is all happening everywhere. And some of it is related or directly related, some of it is indirectly related. But in any event, give me 5 minutes before I get to Syria and all the rest of it. So let's start in Europe. France is in a mess. The government is in the disarray. There is no prime minister. Macron is weakened. Similarly, what's happening in Germany, other big power, disarray, multi-party, the current government is disintegrating and they're in trouble. You go further east, and then, of course, there is Ukraine, which we need to talk about some. You get to Russia, and you get to the state of Georgia, where the population is rioting because the current government does not want to move ahead with trying to get Georgia into NATO. You get to Romania. Maybe I should have gone there first. You get to Romania. They are also had a vote, and the vote is being nixed, and they have to vote again. And in both the cases of Georgia and Romania, there appears to be Russian interference. You go onward to Asia, and there is a mess in Korea. You go down to, let's say, Latin America, and the head of the Brazilian government just had a brain bleeding. Brazil being potentially and actually the strongest state, so we will see what is going to happen to him. You go to the US. It has a big mess politically, which I'll talk about in a minute. You have a new government in Mexico. It has a new government, and it's unclear what's happening. Then you pop up to the Middle East, or up and sideways to the Middle East. And as we speak, although it has gotten little attention in the newspaper, you have a situation where the folks in Gaza are not only continuing to get killed, but are suffering increasingly from famine. And it's winter, and the tent emergency shelters have disintegrated. The hospitals have gotten bombed. The doctors in the hospitals have gotten killed. You go to Israel, where the right-wing government is, clearly not making any changes in its approach to Gaza. It's celebrating the sort of negotiated peace up in Lebanon, but during the time that in Lebanon things are supposed to get sorted out, and Israel and the Lebanese are dividing the zone of protection for Israel and for Lebanon, Israel is still bombing various places in Lebanon. You also jump back to Israel, which is busy in Syria as we speak. It has annexed an additional area in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights it had annexed some time ago. It was part of Syrian territory, but it's now moved on beyond the borders of the Golan Heights that it had before. You have the Prime Minister Netanyahu testifying in court in the various criminal and financial charges against him. And before I go to Syria per se, you have a situation in the United States where the Biden administration is at the end of its days, and the Trump administration obviously is coming in, and we're facing the crisis in Syria. The Biden administration is being fairly tentative and careful. What the Trump administration is intending to do or say is still unclear. But if you are of the disposition where you want to be alarmed, let me tell you that the Trump administration is currently interviewing the top leadership in various departments of the State Department, and the person that's doing the interviewing is a Trump acolyte, but someone who has absolutely zero, and I mean zero background in anything having to do with international affairs. So a total ignoramus on international affairs or the State Department is deciding for the Trump administration who to put in charge here, there, and yonder in the State Department. This is not promising. So, what happened in Syria? Well, the Assad regime was toppled. What does one think led to the toppling? Well, if you ask the Israelis, they produced this through its actions in Lebanon and in Gaza, and it's having bombed Iran, so that Iran, one of the allies of Assad, felt weakened and didn't intervene. And you have Russia, which is busy in the Ukraine, and the assumption is that it feels somewhat weakened in because of its involvement in the Ukraine, and they didn't step in either. Israel is taking credit for this, but it seems to me that that is an exaggeration. The fact that essentially both Iran and Russia threw in the towel with respect to defending Assad and preventing his overthrow has, I think, multiple explanations. But without, getting into the weeds of that, it is interesting to note that Russia, which has been the main defender of the Assad regime, if you recall, when there was the civil conflict in Syria, it was Russia who intervened and bombed for Syria, a big chunk of Syria. And it was during the Obama administration, and Obama decided to stay out and let the Russians deal with the situation, which meant that essentially the US had very little impact in Syria or on the Assad administration. And it was Russia at the forefront. And of course, the other Shiite countries running from Iran through Hezbollah and so forth, also provided a cover for the Assad administration. So the somewhat disengagement or weakening of the situation both in Iran and in Ukraine for Russia might be offered as an explanation why the group that marched through Syria essentially and is now trying to put a government together in Syria was able to do what it was able to do. In other words, it didn't get any resistance of any kind or in any serious way. So, in part, the explanation for the overthrow of the Assad regime has something to do with the fact that those who might have stepped in were engaged either domestically in the case of Iran and to some extent Iran's participation of and help with Russia in the Ukraine, but also weakened because it had been attacked. And Russia being, engaged otherwise in the Ukraine. So a moment of opportunity existed for what is known as the HTS, which is the terrorist group designated by whom, among other things, the United States and the UN, and its leader, al-Jawlani, marched unexpectedly, unexpected on anybody's part in the world, as far as I can tell, to take over and to overthrow Assad. A kind of complicated and yet remarkable and unexpected story, which, analysts in the future will spend a lot of time looking at and examining. So the issue now becomes, so what? And before I get to the so what as to how Syria may or may not reconstruct itself, there's also a so what as to what others are doing and what other interests there are, which may or may not complicate the capacity of Syria to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. On the part of Israel, as we speak, Israel is bombing various sites in Syria, weapons depots and gas facilities and so forth, which of course meets no resistance currently from the non-existing government of Syria. And why the Israelis doing that or taking it upon themselves, they say, well, they just want to make sure that whatever happens in Syria, they don't have the capacity to attack Israel or to make any trouble. So Israel is just taking it upon itself, to bomb here, there, and yonder, and no one is stopping them, and no one seemingly can stop them. Similarly, the US, on a much more modest scale, is also doing a fair of military intervention around the residual locations in Syria that are ISIS controlled, wanting to make sure that ISIS can't come back and take over or play a major role. So two major actors are busy trying to make sure that Syria is somewhat handicapped and denuded from military capacities, and that various groups which potentially could present difficulty outside of Syria are somehow decapitated. So that's going on. Then there is a location in northeast Syria in which Russia has both a naval and a military base. And these two bases are pretty important to Russia for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that it gives Russia ports in that part of the world, and warm water ports, which it did not enjoy before. And second, it gives Russia the base of operations for other activities that it might be engaged in. For example, its military base up there in Syria was sort of the headquarters of the Wagner Group. You will remember that was a sort of semi-independent or autonomous military operation which was active in Africa and elsewhere, which disintegrated when the head of the Wagner Group was killed by the Russians, apropos of nothing. And the military which were part of the Wagner Group, are now part of the Russian army in invading and doing mischief in the Ukraine. But in other words, it goes to show that those bases are important for Russian foreign policy here, there, and yonder, including in Africa and other parts of the world. So that those military bases are located in a section of Syria that is Alawite, and the Alawites were the sort of offshoot group of Shiite Muslims, of which Assad was the head. That is, say, Assad and Assad's group were Alawites. So now the question, of course, is whether the government that comes into power and the groups that come to power in Syria are able to control that part of Syria, or whether there will be opposition in that part of Syria in the way that there doesn't seem to be in the rest of Syria right now, and to what extent the Russians will try to either make a deal with whatever government comes into power in Syria. I don't think they're going to give up those bases. So that's a kind of a wrinkle of the outside world participating in. So then, okay, we have lots of different groups in Syria. Several of them not at all democratic, something we would label various kinds of terrorist groups. And the current head of HTS, al-Jilani, who is trying to organize the reconstruction of government in Syria, is essentially saying that everybody is welcome. We will not discriminate against anybody. I am no longer, an Islamist crazy person. I won't demand that women wear the jihad. Yes, I'm an Islamist, but I won't demand that. Other groups are welcome. We're going to be open-minded. We're going to have a kind of a government that everybody can participate in, etc., etc. Some people and some Syrians are hopeful. Other people are very skeptical whether A, he can pull that off, and B, whether he actually wants it. Now, so far, he's made a reasonable start. That is to say, he is meeting with some of the government officials of the Assad regime and is trying to bring them in. He is leaving the various ministries in place. In other words, he is not sort of rolling over everything governmental that there was in Syria. He's simply saying, you want to be loyal to us, we welcome you, and we want to absorb the existing structure insofar as we can to developing a governing structure for Syria. What does one think of it? Well, it depends on who you listen to and who you read. The people who want to listen to it are Syrians who are sick and tired of the, million Syrians who were killed and maimed under Assad. They are hopeful, but they're cautious. Then, of course, there are millions of Syrians outside of Syria. Turkey hosts about 3 million Syrian refugees. Germany hosted about 1 million refugees. There are Syrian refugees in England and every other place. Some of them are rushing back to Syria. Others are more cautious and saying, they want to see. Now, the odd thing, or one of the many odd things about all of this, was that Erdogan, the head of the Turkish government, had been in negotiation with Assad to see whether or not he would welcome some of the Syrian refugees in Turkey, because Turkey wants to wants to kick some of them out. These negotiations were ongoing. So Turkey has a big stake, or has two stakes in this. One, it would like the Syrians to return to Syria, and two, there is a part of Syria, that is Kurdish, and obviously Turkey has an interest in the Kurds. because of its own Kurds in Turkey. And, will those Kurds in Syria want independence from the mainstream state of Syria that's going to be developed? The El-Jilani has said they're welcome to participate and join, but the Kurds and what happens to the Kurds inside of Syria and what the Turkish role is going to be in all of this is also not clear. So, a monumental mess which is changing from hour to hour, and it is very difficult how this will all play itself out. Now, part of the problem of the world, meaning other countries, the United Nations, participating in all of this and trying to help calm things down and give those that are trying now to take over the the Turkish government, is the fact that that particular group and, in fact, El-Jilani himself are considered terrorists, both by, for example, the United States and for the UN. Now, the UN has jumped in and is trying to deal with and influence what is going on and sort of backpedaling the terrorist designation. That is to say, they're thinking we better play a role here and help out. The United States has not dropped its terrorist designation and is taking a wait and see attitude, both to the leader and the attempt to put a new Syrian government into play. Some other countries have loosened up a little bit. For example, the Prime Minister of England has sort of indicated that maybe the terrorist designation should be dropped. So, and many more countries are taking a wait and see attitude. Now, the wait and see attitude is to see, will they really be not only Islam and Islamic organization, but will they in fact really not or cease behaving like terrorists? The indications they're trying to give in Syria right now is we are not terrorists anymore. We're a responsible group that overthrew a very nasty government that all of Syria wanted to get rid of, more or less, and the world should welcome us, and we'll try to prove to you that we're not a terrorist outfit. But it is early days. And at the moment, they are minding their P's and Q's and are being very careful. Now, part of how is this spilling over into events in the rest of the world? Well, it's spilling over into, as I already mentioned, Israel getting itself involved in a very illegal bombing of a neighboring sovereign state, supposedly. It is spilling over into Turkey trying to play a role. It is spilling over in the sense that Iran, which has been radically weakened, right, due to the fall of Hezbollah and its general weakness amongst the various Middle East states. And its problems at home. So for the moment, Iran is, in a sense, treading water. And will it try to re-engage with those trying to now govern Syria? It's hard to know. The main way that it's spilling over, though, in the north, meaning in Europe, is of course the Ukrainian war. And here, I think what's happening in Syria will increasingly have serious implications for the Ukraine. Russia clearly has its hands full in the Ukraine and sees an opportunity to grab territory and other things in the Ukraine as soon as Trump comes into power. And so it seems to me both politically and militarily focused on the Ukraine, and for the moment, the hell with Syria and the Middle East. Let us concentrate on the Ukraine, which in many ways is more important to Russia than what's happening in the Middle East, at least at the moment. Although, as I said, I mentioned the two military bases, which I think it will fight to hold on to. In the meantime, Western Europe is weakened for all the reasons that I've mentioned, because so many governments in Europe, or at least the more powerful governments in Europe, France and Germany, are in disarray. NATO is under new leadership under for the former Prime Minister of Holland, Netherlands, and he, of course, is trying to shore up the role of NATO, and that NATO can play and needs to play in any disposition of what's going to happen to the Ukraine. The EU is trying to show its strength and its membership, and if anything, is expanding. The head of the Commission has just made an agreement with the Mercosur countries in Latin America to kind of spread its wings and enhance its strength. Why am I, in a sense, throwing all of this into the pot? Well, unfortunately, all of these things are in the pot. That is to say, NATO, the European Union, the weakening of various European governments, the disarray in the elections in Romania and Georgia, and Russia trying to hold on to dear life to play its role as being important, and the disabling fact that the US, which one would have imagined would play a major role in all of these things, is currently treading water under the Biden administration, and every organization in the world, every country in the world is nervous about what's going to happen under Trump. I think it would be hard to locate a period of international affairs in the last few decades where so many things were on the front burner, and where there were so many nuanced linkages as well as hard linkages between all of the events going on in the world. I mean, it's hard to believe that Europe and the Middle East and Asia and Russia and its former under the Soviet period, now independent countries, everybody is in some state of disarray. Everybody is trying to argue and act to try to advantage themselves. And the international institution, which you would think could sort things out at the United Nations, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and so forth, is also handicapped because of the Israeli Gaza West Bank Palestinian issue, which leads to constant US vetoes of any sensible role that it can play, which essentially leaves the UN the Secretary General and other UN officials of various agencies trying to play a role, trying to make recommendations, trying to steer the ship a little bit. But at the moment, there are more disarrays, more vacuums, more uncertainties, and quite literally, the mess is incredible. And it's such a fast-moving situation that almost anything I've said now could have already changed in various ways by the time you listen to this. But what I wanted to accomplish this morning is to show you that this is not just, Syria out there, and it's potentially an important country, and we should focus on it. The Syria situation the Palestinian-Israeli situation, the Ukrainian situation, have very many tentacles that go into not only the big powers, Russia, the United States, China in support of Russia in terms of military help in the Ukraine, not to speak of North Korea, but everybody has their tentacles here. And the degree to which there's going to be some emerging leadership is totally unclear. It's an awful and serious and scary situation. On the other hand, those that are trying to put a Syrian government into on track have a wonderful opportunity, if they can grasp it, to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, if they can find sensible, somewhat democratic, non-terrorist ways of proceeding, because of the disarray surrounding them, and because there's so many fingers and so many dikes, these leaders or the potential leadership in Syria has a great opportunity. And what makes everybody nervous, both inside Syria and Syrians who are outside and everybody else, can they grab the opportunity, or will the whole thing splinter and there will be more disarray in Syria rather than putting Humpty Dumpty back together again? The role model, of course, that people look at is the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya and so forth, where everybody celebrates that a dictator is overthrown, and rather the political situation sorting itself out to stable, somewhat democratic governments, you have continuing civil conflict and disarray. So that's what scares everybody. And insofar as I've heard some interviews with Syrians inside of Syria, it even scares them that this is not a moment where disarray will continue and follow, but is rather a constructive moment. So let us hope for the Syrians, if no one else, that Humpty Dumpty can be put back together again. And as I said, stay tuned. Things are changing by the nanominute. Thank you, and see you in 2 weeks.